We're back on the big spreadsheet. One of the questions that I get a lot is how many games does it take to get to X rank? How many games does it take to get to Challenger or to wherever? And I have the answers to some of those questions based on my climbing experience and some, reasonable advice on why these numbers are going to differ for different people and how you can speed up your process so that it doesn't take you the insane number of games that it took me. So one thing that you've probably heard is, and we'll just go through the numbers here, it took me 2,428 games to go from bronze to diamond. So this was from my first season playing ranked to the first season that I had finally hit diamond. Adding all those up took 2,428 games. To go from diamond to masters took me 3,560 games. And to go from masters to challenger for the first time took me 5,208 games. So that's very interesting because it confirms something that I've heard a lot in the past, which is that it's harder to climb from masters to challenger than it is to climb from bronze to diamond. And in my experience, it didn't feel like that to me, to be honest with you. But in my experience, based on the games that I've played, it is absolutely true that it was easier to go from bronze to diamond than it was to go from master to challenger. Now, easy is kind of a difficult, metric, right? Because easy is pretty subjective. So do I think it was easier to go from bronze to diamond? Not really. But it was certainly more time consuming. It took more numbers of games, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was like an easier time or that, from my perspective, actually, I rather enjoyed the climb from Masters to Challenger. And even though it took more games, I didn't perceive it to be that much longer or that much harder. But people have been saying this for a long time. What you have to understand is that progress comes much slower. And especially when we're talking about climbing ranks and getting above people, it takes a lot longer and a lot more time and effort to improve from being the 7,000th best player to being the top 300. It takes a lot of effort and improvement to do that because it's not easy to surpass the 7,000 through 1,000 players to get to GM. That's really difficult. Like, you're passing 6,000 people who are actively playing the game every single day, as much, maybe even more than you. It's very difficult. And it takes a lot of tiny adjustments and detail changes that aren't super obvious to you, in the way that, like, learning and going from bronze to gold, let's say, you're just learning what the champions in the game do. It's more difficult in the sense that, like, the struggle that you go through game to game requires you to learn a lot more, and it's more tedious or harder, I guess I would say, to memorize all this knowledge. But going from like Masters to Challenger, it's very, very detail oriented, but the games are pretty enjoyable. So I don't know. It's a bit of a tough call on which one's harder. But this is the reality for me, is that this is what happened with my climb. So let's talk about why this took so many games, why this is pretty normal, and how you could go about maybe making this take 6,000 games instead of 10,000 or 11,000 games. So one thing that I think was really impactful on why I was so slow to climb is I started playing the game when I was just starting middle school. So I was probably like, let's see if I can get this right. So I'm 26 in 2025. So how old would I don't know. That was a lifetime ago. I was probably like 12. The problem is that when you're 12, your brain's not very developed. You're not that smart. So obviously, if you start playing a competitive game or trying to get better at anything when you're older and smarter, it's going to be easier. So I think that that's number one. It's also better that you don't start by building a bunch of bad habits for many, many years. There are a lot of things that I changed about the way that I played the game to help me get to Challenger for the first time that weren't about learning something new, but were about unlearning something that I had built as a habit over thousands of games. And it is a lot harder to change something that you've made a habit for thousands of games than it is to learn something new and implement it, in my opinion. Because if you've trained yourself to do something for thousands of games, people say that to build a habit, you need to do something like a certain number of times for a certain number of days. Like if you're trying to do some routine once every day, they'll say it takes about 27 days and things like that to build a habit. In League, obviously, you can get more repetitions and things like that, but you need to be doing it consistently over time. I think, in my opinion, that unlearning something that you've done for thousands of games, like how liberally you use your abilities, throwing them out too frequently, your camera being locked. I think that changing these things when you're used to them for thousands of games is much harder than spending the 50 games it takes to build them into your routine in the first place. So that is really difficult. It's almost worse to be playing and building bad habits than to just not be playing at all and then start up when you're better and wiser in some ways. But of course, you got to play to get better. And, it is going to take, like I said, even if you were really good at improving, it's probably still going to take you tens of thousands, or not tens of thousands, but thousands of games at least to get up to Masters Challenger. So, it's not like you should just quit playing the game and wait until you get there. You have to keep playing. But yeah, in some ways, breaking those bad habits is really, really hard. They're also harder to see, I think. It's easier to see what you're not doing in some ways than it is to see what you're doing wrong. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. It really depends on the thing. But what I would say is that, number one, I started without a lot of PC experience at a very young age. So I was a console player, was used to a controller, was not used to a keyboard and mouse. I started playing on a trackpad, and that was not good, and a computer with 2 gigabytes of RAM, very low FPS, etc. So I would say that there's a lot of factors that make you a good or a bad player, but high quality practice is really important. And so if you're practicing on a computer that sucks, you're not used to a mouse and you have no previous gaming experience, you're young, and your computer sucks, you have really low FPS, you have really high ping, and your monitor sucks and your refresh rate sucks and all this stuff, it's going to make all of the thousands of hours that you put into practicing the game worth a lot less than if you start out with those things set up properly, which is why I've put so much emphasis on those things. I didn't start playing with a monitor better than a 60 hertz monitor, and I didn't start playing with less than, well, my ping changed, right? It was 20 when the server was in California and then went up to 60. One of the reasons why I got stuck in Platinum and Diamond for so long, and part of the reason why, this amount of games that it took to go from Diamond to Masters was probably so long for me at 3,560. It probably has a lot to do with the fact that, my ping had gone up, and I didn't start playing with a monitor better than a 60 hertz monitor until right before I hit Masters, actually. So I had gotten to Diamond on lock screen with no previous PC gaming experience with the 60 hertz monitor at 60 ping. And when those things got better, when I got a better monitor, when my ping went down when I moved to the Midwest for college, when I unlocked my camera, a lot of these things that didn't have a whole lot to do with how I was playing the game, but had to do with the quality of my setup and learning experience, changed how I was able to see the game, and obviously led to me doing a lot better. So I would say that if I was starting from the beginning, or even if I was 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 games into my journey with League, absolutely get the equipment that you need and the setup that you need in order to make what you learn better. Because if you are learning on a much higher ping environment than you need to, because you have the ability to get fiber and you don't have it in your area, or you could have a a 240 hertz monitor or 144 hertz monitor. Obviously, I advocate for 360 hertz, but you don't get that. You're going to experience the game for thousands of games with like a lower quality learning environment. And there are things that you can do that I'm able to do now on 13 ping that I never learned and practiced to do on 60 ping because they weren't possible. Certain timings with support abilities and stuff like that to counter people simply weren't possible on 60 ping. They really weren't. The difference between 60 ping and 13 ping feels insane. It's really large and very noticeable. And so I know, people talk about like, well, it's, technically ping is just, this many number of milliseconds, and the difference between like 50 milliseconds and 13 milliseconds is pretty minuscule, but it really changes what you can do in a game in a dramatic way. Even the difference between 4 ping and 13 ping, because I've also played on 4 ping for a period of time, the difference between 4 ping and 13 ping is very noticeable, and 4 ping feels insane. So, there are advantages like that that you don't have and that you don't have in your practice environment until you set it up. So, play on an Ethernet cable, get fiber internet if it's available in your area. It will reduce your ping in a way that like increasing your internet speed will not increase your ping. Playing on a higher hertz monitor, League can run up to 360 FPS or 360 hertz. So, getting a 360 hertz monitor and running League at 360 FPS is ideal. But of course, even just the benefit is bigger. So if you go from 60 to 144 because it's a cheaper option or something like that, that's great too, if that's what you can afford. Because the jump from 60 to 144 is bigger than the jump from 144 to 240, and that's bigger than the jump from 240 to 360. So you don't need the perfect thing if you can't afford it or don't want to buy that. But I would recommend getting the best setup that you can as early on as you can, because it's going to make your learning experience and quality better. The other thing is that I didn't study the game much. So I watched some League YouTube videos, I think for a long time, but I didn't really study much about the game. And so I didn't VOD review. I still don't really VOD review all that much my own solo queue games. And I think that obviously can slow down your climb, but you're just shifting your time into something else, right? So I think if you VOD review, it's probably helpful, but maybe it just means that you play 8,000 games instead of 10,000 to get to Challenger, but you've just spent the 2,000 hours that you would have playing that extra 2,000 games, you just spent it VOD reviewing. Now, probably the trade-off, although I don't have personal experience with this, probably the trade-off for VOD reviewing is higher than that, because you probably learn more from a VOD review, an hour of VOD reviewing, than you do from an hour of playing. If that's the case, then maybe you would say, okay, I spend 8,000 hours playing 8,000 games, and I do 1,000 hours of VOD review, and that gets me to Challenger in 9,000 hours instead of playing for 10,000 hours and getting to Challenger in 10,000 games. So maybe VOD reviewing is more efficient than playing. It also depends on the rank that you're at. Like I would say that's true the higher rank that you go. I think the higher rank that you go, the more you understand the game, the better you are at being able to VOD review and find solutions to problems and recognize patterns in the game. The lower rank you are, the less you should actually VOD review, no matter what people say. So if you have played like 1,000 games or less, don't ever bother VOD reviewing. You should 100% be putting your time into playing more. When you're getting into the range of, let's say you're like 2,000, 3,000 games in, now you're like gold to platinum. If I had to pick a rank, and it's not exact, and again, I didn't start VOD reviewing at this point or anything either, but if I had to pick a rank, I'd say it probably becomes worth it for you to VOD review at all once you've hit higher than gold, maybe even platinum, right? Before gold, I don't think you should bother with VOD reviewing your games at all. I think you're infinitely better off actually playing the game in order to practice. Once you get to, let's say, platinum, you probably could save time by VOD reviewing, but it's going to be pretty equal to the amount of that you're getting out from putting more time into the game, into playing more games. When you get into like platinum, emerald, diamond especially, I think that VOD reviewing is going to be more helpful than playing. And so spending more time VOD reviewing, less time playing is going to be good. I also would say this. So while that's true of VOD reviewing, if you're below gold, learning what the champions do is really important. Obviously, it's one of the big fundamentals that you need to learn when you're learning the game, and what the items do. And so I would say, well, you can't spend time out of game VOD reviewing. You will learn much faster if you're in bronze or let's say iron through gold by reading the league wiki on champions and watching champion spotlights and stuff like that. So let's say the way I would improve my journey here to make it less than 11,000 games to challenger would be when I start playing the game and I'm in iron through gold, every day I would pull up a new champion, watch the champion spotlight, read through the champions wiki. It'd take like 10 minutes to do both of those things. And then in half of a year, in only 6 months, I would have learned every champion in the game pretty thoroughly. And, then I'd be at a really good point with the game in like 6 months. And that would have helped me go to gold much, much faster, go to platinum much, much faster than I did on my journey. Then when you get into platinum, I would start VOD reviewing. And then when you get into emerald, you VOD review a little bit more. And then when you get into diamond, you VOD review a little bit more than that, etc. And then you get into masters and you VOD review even more. And you get into GM and you VOD review even more compared to the ratio of time that you're spending playing the game versus VOD reviewing. You get into challenger, you VOD review even more. That's how I would approach it. So obviously studying things like the wiki and learning the champions, or that could be watching YouTube videos on tips about the game as well. When you're lower rank, and then as you get into higher rank, continuing to do that, but mostly focus on, VOD reviewing, or more focus on VOD reviewing would be good. And then I think it's really important that you understand how important your setup is and that you're doing your practice right from the beginning. Doing your practice right from the beginning means lots of things. It means having the right ping, internet, monitor, computer, FPS, all this stuff. It means focusing your practice into certain champions. So it's great that I can play 15 different champions. I have 100 games of ranked experience on. That's great if I want to play on a team. But if I'm just trying to play solo queue, I probably would have been much better off just focusing on 2 or 3 champions from the beginning. It probably took me 11,000 games in part because I put 50 or more games on like 20 plus different champions. So when you try 20 different champions for like 5 days each, you would spend like a year or 2 years, right, worth of games just learning champions you're probably never going to main again. That is a huge waste of time. And of course, you have to find your main. You have to put in some games in order to do that. But unless you're trying to have a wide champion pool for a team or whatever, or you're enjoying playing those other champions just on a fundamental fun basis, then there's no reason to do that. So obviously focusing on a fewer number of champions so that you can learn more about the game and about those specific champions, having the right setup. And then, like I said, I'll probably do a whole separate video on unlocking your camera. Most people have their camera unlocked nowadays, but the thing is, even when you unlock your camera, there's a lot to improve about camera control. And so your journey doesn't end just because you hit the unlock camera button and decide to start playing that way. You have to continue to make improvements at that, because you can always be framing your camera better so that you have to move it less and can keep your cursor near your character more, so that you can see more of what's going on, so that you catch key ability cooldowns and summoner spells being used. Maybe you can use your camera better to toggle around the map to your teammates using F keys, or by clicking around faster to see what's going on in other parts of the map, not just your camera around you. I've seen a lot of players, especially engaged support players I've coached, right, where they have issues keeping track of their teammates in their camera. So they're focusing their camera on where they want to go, what they're looking at, and what the enemy team is doing in a lot of cases, or who their target is, but they're not paying attention to the rest of the fight, or they're not paying attention to what their teammates are doing. So there's always more to be done about camera control. And that means that unlocking your camera and getting used to it never ends, because you're always improving how well you're using your camera. Had I played, instead of only playing, let's see, when did I unlock my camera on my journey? Somewhere around here. So I've played a little bit under, I've still played more than half of my games with my camera locked, right? Because I played 5,200 since I got to Masters. I unlocked my camera right before that. So I've probably still played 7,000 or so games with my camera locked and 5,000 with my camera unlocked. That means that I missed out on 7,000 games worth of experience and data that I could have been collecting about how the game works and the way that I did things in that situation. I missed out on 7,000 games of that extra information about what I was doing. Think about how disastrous that is. What a waste of time that is. That I lost 7,000 games of high quality practice. It's not like I lost everything from those games, but I learned much slower in 7,000 games because I didn't capture the information that was in front of me by moving my camera around, because I didn't want to feel uncomfortable moving my camera around. Feeling uncomfortable moving my camera around went away after a very short period of time. Literally after like 10 to 50 games, your camera will feel comfortable to use unlocked. It's just that you get better and better and better at framing the situations, at moving your camera around to the right spots, and at gathering information. And so it's a never-ending process. So if it's a never-ending process, like with clicking, moving your camera around is like right-clicking or dodging it. You just get better over time. It takes a lot of repetitions and practice to do it and to gather better information and higher quality information. So the faster you unlock your camera, the faster you get access to that, and the less games you waste not being able to judge the quality of your decisions based on all of the information that was available to you. So these things are really important. So the long and short of it is that it does seem to be true that it takes like 10,000 games to really master something. That's another similar one I've run into. It did take me about 10,000 hours or so to hit Challenger for the first time. Which I found kind of interesting. Obviously, people improve at a different rate. So if you have some sort of learning disability, if you are young and your brain's not fully developed yet, if you, are not getting high quality practice because you're on a low quality computer and monitor and your ping is terrible and, it's all doomed, and your camera's not unlocked, so you're not picking up all the information you could about what's going on in your games, you're not going to recognize the patterns and improve as quick as if you were doing those things. It can be more efficient to study the game by watching YouTube videos and learning about the game, and by watching the champion spotlights, reading through the wiki on the champion, to what the champions do, what the items do, stuff like that will help you a lot. And it can also be good, to VOD review your games once you're capable of understanding what's happening. And once VOD review becomes maybe more important with the right mentality when you get to a little bit of a higher rank. So doing those things, you could probably cut the climb down from, 10, 11,000 games to hopefully 6,000 or 8,000 games instead. And that's what I really hope to do through my YouTube channel, is provide information about the game, including this general overview, but information about the game that will help make that happen for people, help make it quicker so that we're not wasting so much time on this, and so that we can elevate the level of the game, at the highest echelons as well. With that being said, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.